everyone, I'm Layla,
I'm Meg.
and tonight we're going to be talking about social reproduction theory, care ethics, and rediscovering humanity under socialism. Just a quick trigger warning, we are briefly going to discuss domestic abuse and interpersonal partner violence. And so if that's something that's triggering or upsetting for you, I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to step away or like stop the recording because I wouldn't want you to put yourself in a situation that would be upsetting, right? Just a heads up. So Marx, a socialist theorist, believed that in order to understand human societies, a theorist needs to first look at the economics of everyday life production and how that progressed into the state that is currently seen. Looking at the historical progression of material and economic interaction, Marx believed was the biggest factor in understanding a community because all other secondary aspects of a society, their religion, their family structures, etc., are all shaped by the means of production. This principle is the idea that formulated this idea of a base and a superstructure. So according to Marx, our base is our economic structure and the economic system that we interact with, which then influences the superstructure, all of our non-production, non-economic interactions kind of exist. And then those interactions that we legitimate as people who interact with those structures then inform our base and how we like interact with our economic system. So under capitalism, we kind of have this idea of the invisible hand, the free market, giving every person individual liberty over themselves to gain wealth as an individual. And what this does is put a lot of emphasis on individual power, which then heavily influences the ways that we interact with each other on a societal and non-economic level. But of course, things that affect our society don't just stay outside of the home. Of course, they also permeate our ideological framework for how we interact with ourselves and each other within our home. So in a domestic sense, acquiring substantial income is forced to be the main priority because acquiring wealth is the only ways that these people are able to survive, right? So now there's financial quantification of all of our interactions. We look at not just ourselves, but each other measured by what we provide economically, because what we provide economically is what allows us to have a higher social status and what allows us to enjoy our lives, right? So value is equated to the economic contributions into the home. So this means that anyone who's not the breadwinner is not looked at as valuable as the person bringing in the money, and that person also doesn't have the same amount of power as the person who is bringing in the money. So this means that domestic labor and those who complete it are then automatically devalued because they're not bringing in economic and any economic income, and therefore not bringing in anything socially. This, of course, isn't necessarily accurate, and social reproduction theory, a socialist theory, critiques capitalist way of viewing it by allowing us to see the ways that particularly women are tasked with social reproduction, not just in the home, but on a societal level. So in a very logistical way, right, women are the ones creating the bodies that are going into work and then bringing in these economic contributions. But in a less tangible way, they're also tasked with creating the culture and the operations of the home. They're tasked with not just creating the home, but maintaining it and caring for the other people in the home. And this is true on a societal level too. You see this idea of this social mothering where women are tasked with caring for the people around them on a logistical and an emotional level, because care is looked at as like a more feminine, more feminine task, right? So social reproduction theory acknowledges the capitalist influences on our domestic life and the ways that it stunts the feminist struggle for equality and liberation because of the ways that women are not respected, but overworked on a social level. And this intersection of class struggle and feminist struggle in a fight towards holistic liberation is what social reproduction theorists are beginning to fight for, because they see the ways that not having opportunities to gain economic wealth, but being tasked with such large amounts of work really stunts the way that women are respected in a capitalist society. So social reproduction theorists argue that true feminist liberation and equality cannot be received under capitalism because of the way that capitalism views labor and views the labor of women. So there is societal harm towards gender minorities. In addition to being invalidated in their work on both a domestic and societal level, gender minorities are controlled in domestic settings because their lack of respectability means lack of power, not only that they have over the people around them, but the power and agency that they have over their own lives, which makes them more susceptible to abuse. This is abuse that, according to social reproduction theory, could be avoided or at least limited under socialism. We see this to be true there was a study in Canada done where everyone in this town was given universal basic income. And in addition to all of these other benefits that they saw domestic abuse go down significantly because women were able to have their own economic stability outside of their partner. They were able to have agency over their own lives. So this shows us that our economic standing is not simply economic, but it also very directly translates to the agency and the power and the respectability that we have under our own lives. We see this too, like in our current capitalist system in America, 99% of people who are experiencing domestic abuse are also experiencing economic abuse because of how easy it is to control someone physically when you control them economically. Similar to the harm committed against gender minorities, racial minorities experience high levels of oppression and exploitation because, of course, they are viewed as lower hierarchy on a social level because of their status as a racial minority. That directly translates to their economic status because it determines their racial status determines the amount of economic resources and economic mobility that is available to them. And without any economic mobility, they're not only looked at as low class because of their racial status, but then looked at as low class as their economic status. So this is yet another cycle that reinforces exploitation and oppression of racial minorities. And that's something that can be avoided and mitigated in a socialist world where their economic status doesn't have to mean so much about their social status. Of course, racial and gender oppression and exploitation does exist outside of capitalist systems. So this is not to say that capitalism created racism or sexism. And it's also not to say that eliminating capitalism and shifting to socialism would eliminate these social problems, but it would alleviate some of the conditions that allow these isms to exist and to flourish. So even though capitalism is not the sole root of these issues, true equality and liberation cannot be brought about until the necessary step of moving on from capitalism into socialism. Socialist solutions. So if the fundamental harm of capitalism that these socialists are claiming is an attempt to separate our economic and our social lives with only a focus on the economic lives, Marx and Engels kind of fall short in this idea of focusing on our social lives instead. What needs to happen instead is to focus and recognize the present interconnectedness of these two lives, bringing them together and working with them in the same respect, right? Particularly when looking at social and systemic harm like sexism and racism, the separation revokes our sense of humanity and therefore our empathy of each other because we're so focused on our economic lives. So acting on caring for these people in a social sense to try to make up for the ways that they're being economically harmed is not nearly as productive or proactive as caring for them through economics. Which brings us to this idea of care economics, which is this socialist idea of creating and interacting with structures, economic and non-economic, in a way that prioritizes care in all of the operations that we engage in. So we're able to care for the individuals, both socially and economically, as opposed to just kind of attempting to repair the harm. So this means that in a shift to socialism, our focus when interacting with our economic system would not be how much power and wealth can I gain as an individual. It's how can I use the economic resources in front of me to care for myself and the people around me? And how can I trust the people around me to do the same thing towards me? Creating a more collectivist view, understanding the ways that we're bound to each other and not against each other, which would alleviate a lot of the ways that we harm one another, both on a social and economic way.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk a bit about care ethics specifically. And so care ethics are a feminist ethical framework that believes that relationships, circumstance, and compassion should inform our ethics. And so well-known care ethicists include Nell Nodings, Carol Gillian, and Virginia Held. And here, a quote to just sort of summarize what care ethics is caring, empathy, feeling with others, being sensitive to each other's feelings, all may be better guides to what morality requires in actual context, which is a quote by Virginia Held. And so what makes care ethics distinct from other ideological frameworks? So while most ethical frameworks are assumed to be validated by their consistent correctness, regardless of circumstance or emotional reaction or connection, care ethics believe that this abstract and sort of disembodied approach to ethics neglects how our human instinct to provide care and the ways that our emotion informs our decision-making should also inform what actions we deem to be ethical. And care ethics, going a step further, is widely considered to be a feminist philosophy because of how the act of nurturing and providing care has been deemed a feminine function. And this connects back to social reproduction theory and the idea that the act of providing care under capitalism has been devalued specifically because of its indirect relationship to accumulating wealth as opposed to actually performing labor for a business. And so despite the necessity of care in roles such as raising children or providing medical attention, care's perceived lack of objectivity, and also within the context of capitalism, its inability to directly produce wealth has led society to see it as illogical and inferior in comparison to reason when making ethical decisions. And usually, to go a step further, when we're talking about reason, we're not necessarily talking about something that is more or less objective or right, but more so something that we see as being distant from these more feminized and more emotion-centered characteristics and behaviors that capitalism isn't incentivized to value because it doesn't directly relate to the accumulation of wealth or power. Socialism and care. And so socialism has the potential to be an economic system in which care ethics can be applied. So under capitalism, our ability to provide and receive care is largely dictated by our access to wealth. An example of this that we could probably imagine is a wealthy family's ability to afford childcare in a way that a poor family is not. And so this ability to receive care, to receive nurturing, to have your load lightened is something that has largely become transactional and quantifiable because of the ways that wealth and power inform all of our interactions with one another. And so while under socialism, if we all were able to have those basic needs met and we weren't having to operate as much within this transactional framework, care could be something that's given from a standpoint of generosity and humanity as opposed to economic survival on behalf of both the person who is providing care and then also the person receiving care, and what that care, what the implications that care has on their ability to further accumulate wealth and perform labor. And so those with more capital have a greater capacity to receive care because they have a means to afford the transactional care dynamic created by capitalism. Socialism, on the other hand, works to eliminate this kind of inequality that would make care too expensive and give us a greater capacity to act with generosity and emotion rather than exchange. And so under socialism, there's a greater capacity for these acts of care to be made on the basis of compassion and our shared humanity, as opposed to whatever we happen to gain from that transaction. This is a quote from the Care Manifesto. As the feminist economist Nancy Folber puts it, we should be thinking of invisible hearts, not invisible hands, when it comes to how care often is and indeed should be organized. That is, we should fully acknowledge that the forces of care and compassion must always override the market-mediated forces of individualized self-interest. Our model of universal care is a key step towards resolving this economic paradox. And to go a little bit off of this quote, so it could even be argued that Marx and Engels did not write the Communist Manifesto with care ethics in mind, because even in that document, their argument in favor of socialism was largely rooted in this way of seeing our economy through a scaled and transactional lens, as opposed to the opportunity that we could have to see each other through a lens of humanity when we no longer have to see each other through the lens of what our interaction translates to us in terms of profit or power. And so, yeah, so moving and shifting into a system of care ethics allows our relationships with one another to be more fully humanized, because we are able to interact with each other without needing to filter that interaction through what it means for us economically. And just one last slide on socialism and care ethics. Care ethics are only capable of being practiced when our well-being is understood collectively. A mother does not care for her child because of what she gains from that interaction. A neighbor does not share a cup of sugar only when they know they'll gain an egg in return. Care for the sake of care, a practice our society has discredited largely because of its association with femininity and also with its inability to result in economic advantage is only fully possible when we live in an economy that does not demand we earn our right to survival or belonging. And so both social reproduction theory and care ethics really tie into the sense of socialism having the opportunity for us to live and operate within an economic system that allows us to experience our full humanity.
Yeah. And so what we see is this de-emphasis on personal advantage and personal consumption, both in tangible materialistic things, but also in like emotional capacity, right? Saying that like if things are scarce the way that capitalism tells us that they are, empathy and care and validity must be scarce. And so allowing someone else to experience that care automatically means that I'm going to have less of it. Where under a socialist system, we're more able to understand the ways that we are bound to one another, and we're able to see that like caring for someone else simply for the sake of caring is not only good for me because it's nice to care for people, but it's also good for my greater community, to be in a more caring environment. And when we're able to see that empathy and care and validity are not things that are scarce, not things that are able to run out, we're able to interact with one another in a way that focuses on them, and allows us to see each other as people, because people exist as people regardless of their economic status. So there's less to prove and more to offer under a socialist system. And that's what these theories just show us, just a snippet of what is possible in that aspect under socialism.
Well, thank you for watching our presentation. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope that it sparks some good discussion.
Thanks. Bye.